Good morning and welcome to today's Tanya class. Today's Tuesday. We're learning the Tanya. And today, we're going to be summarizing what we've learned in recent weeks about how we can come to a relationship in which we love God. It's very unusual in modern language to think of religion and romance in the same sentence, in the same breath. But that's what Tanya is teaching us. It's a fundamental paradigm shift when it comes to our relationship with God. That this is not just about awe and fear. It's about love and feeling. I'm Rabbi Dovid Vigler from Chabad Palm Beach Gardens, and I'm grateful to be teaching you here this morning. Good morning, Corey and Marty on Facebook. Good morning, Ashley on YouTube. Nice to see everybody. And I'm looking forward to studying this with you. Please do feel free to send me your questions and comments and feedback. You can always email me to rabbi@jewishgardens.com. That's rabbi@jewishgardens.com. So, how is it that we can nurture a feeling of love for God? And what would happen if you were able to reach such a milestone? Love is a beautiful place to be. Today, we're going to summarize the 5 kinds of love that we've learned in recent chapters of Tanya, and hopefully experience a little bit of das, a little bit of feeling to the ideas that we've understood in the previous chapters. Just to remind you where we're standing in Tanya, we're at the end of chapter 34, which means that if we step out of the forest and away from the trees and try to get an overview of the forest, here's what's going to happen. The first 9 chapters of Tanya were effectively an introduction to who we are and the tools that we harbor. The subsequent chapters, from chapters 10 through 25, were tools to self-mastery, were paths to self-mastery, about how we were able to overcome the inherent tug of war which is within us. There was the long way, chapters 10 through 17, and then the short way, chapters 18 through 25. That's how we could achieve self-mastery of allowing our godly soul to dominate over our natural soul. Then, from chapters 26 to where we are now in chapter 34, well, chapters really 26, 27, and 28 really discussed various hacks to self-mastery. Specifically, how to overcome sadness and depression and replace it with joy. We spoke about how to overcome your sadness with regards to your sins, with regards to bad things that happen to you, and to your struggles. But from chapters 29, we began a new approach, which was about chapters 29 through 34, which is the section that we're finishing today. Is the idea of nurturing a deep and meaningful relationship with God. What a beautiful place we're able to reach when we're able to nurture a romantic relationship with God. And as we finish chapter 34, we experience 5 different methods, 5 different kinds of love, which are pathways for us to deepen our relationship with God. You know, here we are, we're mature, we're advanced, we're sophisticated human beings. And every other aspect of our life matures. Our relationship with our spouse, our relationship with our children, our relationship with our business, our relationship with money, our relationship with real estate, everything matures. We cannot allow our relationship with God to stagnate or to be stuck in where it was when we left Hebrew school and when we had our bar or bat mitzvah. It's time to take a plunge into our relationship with God as well, and that is the path that Tanya takes us along. I'd like to welcome Lucy Brown, Graciela, Helen and Warren from Virginia, and Rob from Chicago, Terry from Atlanta, Elaine from Palm Beach Gardens, and everybody else who's watching us that hasn't commented yet. So nice to see everybody. Once again, you can always review the summaries of the chat, the reviews. All the Tanya classes are recorded from chapters 22 and onwards. They're on YouTube, on youtube.com/Jewish Gardens. That's youtube.com/Jewish Gardens. And prior to that, I don't think Ashley has yet uploaded the audio classes to YouTube, but she will, God willing, soon. And if you'd like to hear those previous classes, you can find them by just emailing Ashley at office@jewishgardens.com. That's office@jewishgardens.com, or calling the office at 561-624-2223. And Ashley will gladly send you the recordings of all the Tanya classes. I believe they started chapter 3 when we started recording them on audio. Special thank you to Keith Kleinig, who is our sponsor today for today's Torah study. Thank you, Keith, for making today's Torah study possible. We appreciate your support. Like it says in Ethics of the Fathers, if there's no flour, Flour, there is no Torah. Without Torah, there is no flour, and without flour, there is no Torah. So thank you, Keith, for allowing us to sustain and to survive and thrive through these difficult times. May today's Torah study serve to bless you in all of your endeavors. Anybody can dedicate daily Torah study, monthly or weekly Torah study online by going to jewishgardens.com/donate. That's jewishgardens.com/donate, or by calling the office at 561-624-2223. Special welcome to Alyssa Macher from Harrisburg, Pennsylvania, not far from the Catskills where I am. Special welcome to Miriam. I think she might be in New York. I can't remember if you're in New York or Palm Beach. And Whitney from Amsterdam. Great to see you, Whitney. Good morning and afternoon, Whitney. Yes, well stated. I think you're in the afternoon, we're in the morning. And from Chicago is Harvey. This is so beautiful that we're able to have international, truly global Torah study. Thanks, Whitney, for joining us from the European Union. So let's get straight into it. Today we're summarizing the 5 meditations from sadness to joy. We're working towards self-mastery. We're trying to deepen our relationship with God. I want you to think about this a moment. When you stand before God, will you stand before God, nach 120, after 120 years, will you stand before God like a school kid sucking his thumb who says, the dog ate my homework, that's why I didn't have a meaningful relationship with you? Or are you going to have the courage to take the plunge, to take the leap, to reinvent yourself, to break the glass ceiling, and to reinvent the relationship that you've been taught to have with God, which is one of fear and awe, and one where you have to do and don't ask questions, to one which is romantic and beautiful and meaningful and deep. And that's what we're doing today. So what we're going to be covering right now, and again, I'm only summarizing, and within the book of Tanya, I'm on page 385 in this Tanya book, the Practical Tanya. Page 385 is a very short piece of Tanya, the very final words of chapter 34. But ideally, I'm going to be speaking about this idea orally right now, as I'm summarizing the 2 kinds of love that we came across in chapter 31, the 2 kinds of love that we came across in chapter 33, and the 1 kind of love that we came across in chapters 34. Remind you that chapter 32 was all about loving your fellow Jew. There was almost like a parenthesis. Chapter 32 was almost a parenthesis, which was talking about our relationship with each other. It's when we're able to have a healthy relationship with ourselves and with our God. That's when we're able to have a healthy relationship with someone else. If you want to have a deep and meaningful and a healthy relationship with your spouse, it's not really possible to do that if you don't have a healthy relationship with yourself and with your God. If you don't know who you are, then how is someone else supposed to know who you are? So that's why chapter 32 was wedged in between the 2 loves for God in chapter 31, the 2 loves for God in chapter 33, and the 1 love for God in chapter 34, all of which we're going to summarize in just a few moments. As we're about to learn, your relationship with yourself and your relationship with God is one and the same. And if you're not nurturing a relationship with God, if you're not fanning the flames of passion between yourself and God, there is a huge hollow within yourself, which thus limits your ability to connect with another. Good morning, Bob Wertheimer. And as Corey very beautifully just pointed out on Facebook, she pointed out that the Hebrew word for man and the Hebrew word for woman is exactly the same word, Aish, which means fire, just that the man has a Yud extra and the woman has a Hey extra. So the Aish of man, the fire of man becomes Ish, and the fire of woman becomes Isha, where she has a Hey and he has a Yud. The Yud and the Hey together, his Yud and her Hey together form the name of God. When a man and a woman come together with God welcomed into the relationship, then he is a man, she is a woman, and they flourish. But when he expels God and she expels God from their relationship, when it's only selfish and about themselves, when they have no room for God, then he expels the Yud from his name, she expels the Hey from her name, and what's left is fire. He has fire, she has fire. And that's obviously the fires of destruction. Beautiful point you brought out there, Corey. Thank you for mentioning that. So let's jump straight into it. What are these 5 loves? So in chapter 31, we learned that our godly soul is a piece of God. This is an idea which we already were introduced to in chapter 2 of Tanya, that our godly soul is literally a piece of God. And in chapter 31, we realized that we're living in a state of dysfunction as we've got to grapple, we have to struggle with our natural soul that's literally pulling us away from who we are and who we want to be. Our godly soul is literally a piece of God. God is not a foreign stranger, an entity, an alien that is trying to dominate and subdue us. God is our essence and our core. This is an idea that we discussed in Paradigm Shift Lesson 2. The idea that who we are in essence is godly. So God is not a foreign being from who we are. God is our essence. Now, when we realize that we're going to have to struggle with our natural soul for all of eternity, for the rest of our lives, it could easily throw us into a state of depression. And in chapter 31, we overcame that depression by realizing 2 very important things. First of all, we realized that each and every time that we do a mitzvah, we are reuniting our prince who was heretofore in prison, our godly soul, who was imprisoned within the natural soul, and setting him free momentarily. Each and every time we do a mitzvah, we're experiencing the reunion of the imprisoned prince with his long lost father, the king, each and every single time we do a mitzvah. So we're honest with ourselves and we recognize that we're not going to be able to overcome, to break free of our struggle with our natural soul. This is an idea that we learned in the teen chapters of Tanya, that if you're a Beinoni, if you're an ordinary Jew, you don't have the ability to destroy and vanquish your natural soul. That's only a tzaddik, only a righteous person is able to do that. That's a club that you have to be invited into. But for the rest of us, that we need to struggle for the rest of our lives, the mere realization that our state of dysfunction allows us to reunite our imprisoned prince, our godly soul, with his father, the king, each and every time we do a mitzvah, is an extraordinary joy, as we realize that we experience homecoming every single time that we do a mitzvah. And that gives us a profound sense of purpose, of direction, and of meaning when we become conscious of the reunion that we are able to create every single time we do a mitzvah. Now, this idea, just to expand on it a little bit, is depicted by the fact that when the Jews were crushing Egypt with 10 devastating plagues, they could have asked Pharaoh for anything. Instead of asking Pharaoh for freedom, they asked for 3 days of freedom, after which they would come back to Egypt. That's what they said to Pharaoh. Now, it doesn't really make sense why Moses would have asked for 3 days if he could have asked for anything. But in the metaphor, it makes sense, because when we speak about Pharaoh being our natural soul and the Jews being the godly soul, when we recognize that our godly soul is trapped under the clutches, the talons of the natural soul, just like the Jews were trapped under Egyptian persecution, it then starts to dawn upon us why Moses asks only for 3 days of peace. Because our godly soul can never truly escape the clutches of the natural soul. We're doomed to struggle forever, for the rest of our lives, with our natural soul. And therefore, we can only experience short periods of freedom, short periods of respite. And that's what Moses was doing by asking for 3 days of freedom. This is the first of the 5 loves which we nurture towards God, when we realize that we can give profound joy to God when we do a mitzvah, because what we're doing is not just a random act of kindness. What we're doing is that we're reuniting the imprisoned prince with his father, the king, the trapped prince. And that idea that we're giving nachas to our father as I, the lost child, am coming back to my father, that fills me with a profound sense of love, as I realize that he's waiting for me. He wants me. He yearns for me to break free from this dysfunctional state in which I find myself. Just to give a quick metaphor to this idea, this is why we blow the shofar in Rosh Hashanah. You know, the metaphor that the Baal Shem Tov taught was of a king who wanted to test his son to see if he was worthy of becoming the new king. So what he did was he banished his son, the prince, far away, to a very far away place, to the very furthest reaches of the kingdom, where the people there are simple, they don't even know who the king is, to live like a farmer and to see if the prince truly was a prince, if he truly has nobility running through his veins, if he's able to come back home. And there the prince lives for many years, and he forgets that he's a prince, and he learns and he talks like the villagers, like the farmers, until one day it dawns upon him, he remembers that he's actually a prince and he's got to reinvent himself, and he finds his way back to the palace, but he's forgotten how to speak like a king. He's forgotten how to speak like a prince. So what does he do? He calls out he comes to the gate, and the guards don't even know what he's talking about when he says, I'm the prince. He's speaking like a vagrant, like a vagabond, and they're like, you're not the prince, we're not trying to let you in. But then what he does is, out of sheer frustration, he calls out from the depths of his soul, and as he cries out, the father, the king, hears his voice, and he says, that's what I've been waiting for, that's the voice of my son. This is our call of the shofar in Rosh Hashanah. All year long, we're the prince, and we're struggling in the mud. We're struggling in the swamp of this physical world as we try to find our way back home. We don't know up from down, left from right. We're still running after money. We're running after pleasures. We can't remember spirituality and godliness. We can't even remember that we're a prince. Until eventually comes the high holidays, and we remember, 1 second, I think I'm a prince. And we try to make our way back to Hashem, but we don't even know how. Until eventually the voice of the shofar comes straight from our heart. It's a simple sound. And that simple sound is the voice of the prince coming home, to which the father, the king, says, my son, I've been waiting for you. This is the moment of reunification, the moment of love. And that is the first of the 5 loves that we're able to experience, what we learned in chapter 31 of Tanya, that the love that we can experience is we realize that we are coming home every time we do a mitzvah. Which leads us to the second of the 5 loves, which also is in chapter 31, when we said, 1 second, why do we have to live in the state of dysfunction? Why does life have to be so challenging and so weird, where we have to struggle all of our lives? Why am I supposed to be happy? How can I be happy when I realize how dysfunctional my life is? To which we realize that we're actually fulfilling the purpose of a mission. Our Father has sent us, the Father, the King, has sent us on a special forces mission to go out and to engage with the natural soul, so that every time we do a mitzvah, we're not only reuniting our godly soul with God, but we're actually taming the animal soul. We're actually refining the natural soul. And this, friends, is really the theme of the next section of Tanya, of chapters 35, 36, and 37. The idea of why we need to struggle with our natural soul for our entire lives. To realize that the purpose is not in the destination. The purpose is in the journey. The struggle itself gives tremendous joy to God, as we learned actually in chapter 27. That was the doctrine of the joy that God receives every time we suppress our temptation. We learned about the blinding light that we unleash each and every time that we do a mitzvah, that we break our natural soul's desire for selfishness. We learned that from the Zohar, the quote from the Kabbalah. The idea that each and every time we break we suppress our desire, we're giving tremendous pleasure to God. But a little bit more than that, we're learning now the second level of love was the realization that I'm actually fulfilling the mission for which I was sent to this world. And instead of getting depressed in my dysfunction, I realize that I'm actually fulfilling my purpose in this world, just like a soldier in Afghanistan or Iraq wouldn't get depressed realizing that he's so far away from home, but rather be filled with purpose and joy knowing that he's protecting his people and that he's fulfilling the mission for which he was sent. So too, my soul down in this dysfunctional earth, in this dysfunctional body, and this dysfunctional tug of war with the natural soul gives me tremendous purpose in knowing that I am fulfilling the will and the wishes of my Father, or the King in heaven. And when I know that I'm giving him nachas, that fills me with a sense of joy and with a sense of love. And that, friends, is the second kind of love, that of the 5 loves that we are introduced to in these chapters of Tanya. And both of those came out of chapter 31. Chapter 32, as mentioned moments ago, talks about love with your fellow Jew. Only when you're able to have a healthy relationship with yourself can you have a healthy relationship with another human being. But now we move on to the 3rd and 4th loves in chapter 33. And there we learned about the meditation of God's greatness. So whereas chapter 31, we're learning about us and about how we are able to come home and to fulfill the purpose for which we were sent. Chapter 33 focuses more about God's greatness. And we spoke about how God is everywhere and God is the most powerful, the only entity that exists effectively. The unity of God, the doctrine of God's unity, which we explained to mean not that God is the only God, but that God is the only entity that actually exists. Everything that exists is merely an extension from God's creative power, from God's perpetual creative energy. And when we meditated upon that idea in chapter 33, and again, I highly encourage you to review that class at youtube.com/Jewish Gardens. That's youtube.com/Jewish Gardens under the playlist called Tanya. It was once we realized that God is so great, we came to the realization that the mere meditation of this idea fulfills the purpose for which we were sent to this world. When we understand the unity of God, we have created a home for God in the most precious piece of real estate on earth, and that is in your brain, my heart, and your heart. Our brain and heart is the most precious piece of real estate. If you thought it's a skyscraper in Manhattan, you're wrong, because there's a price for that skyscraper. Your mind and heart is priceless, and that is where God chooses to dwell. And the 3rd love that we reach is the realization that I can create a home for God. I can fulfill the purpose of my existence. My life is not random. I am the focal point of all of existence. I'm the fulcrum of existence. When I can close my eyes and with a cup of coffee, I'm able to meditate upon the doctrine of divine unity, that God is the only entity that exists, thus fulfilling the entire purpose for which my soul was sent to this world. If you've just joined us, we're learning the 5 levels of love, the 5 kinds of love, which Tanya, Chabad Hasidic philosophy, teaches us as to how we can mature and deepen our relationship with God. So we just experienced the 3rd, and I'm summarizing the previous chapters that we've learned in recent weeks. The 3rd level of love is the love when you realize that you can make a home for God. There is no greater pleasure than having a home. Think about it. You can have everything in the world, but if you don't have a home, if you don't have a hook to hang your hat on, then you're wandering aimlessly. The Talmud tells us that a person who has no real estate is not a person. Quite a dramatic statement. If you don't have a home, if you don't have a piece of real estate, you're not a person. When we are creating a home for God, we're actually giving God the greatest pleasure, the most basic and fundamental pleasure. And when we can do that for God, again, not as a foreign alien entity, like a foreign government or head of state, but when we realize that we're giving ourselves, God is my essence. My godly soul is literally a piece of God. When I realize that I'm giving my essence a home in this world and fulfilling the purpose of which I'm sent to this world, that fills me with a profound sense of love as I realize that I am doing something loving for the one that I love. Just like your wife or your husband, think about it. When you do something loving for the person that you love, that adds to your love more than when they do loving things for you. Think about that. You experience more love for someone when you do loving acts for them than when they do loving acts for you. And I wonder if you agree with that or not. But when we do a loving act for God, that fans the flames of our love and increases our love for God. Okay? So that was the third of the 5 loves that we've learned in Tanya. There's one more in this chapter, and that is the realization that God receives great pleasure through our choices. The realization, this might be an extension of the third love. The realization that at every moment in time, and every place that we go to, we're empowered to bring God's home to that place. We are empowered to go to a place where God is hidden in order to reveal God in that place, to reveal God's unity in that place. You see, we weren't put into this earth in order to live in an insulated bubble where we can live in a holy place where godliness is revealed, like to study in yeshiva all day long, to pray all day in the synagogue, where everybody knows that God is great. That's not the purpose. We were created so we can go out to the business place, whether it's in Chicago or in Phoenix or in Atlanta, to go to the far reaches of this earth, where God is hidden, where God is unknown, and there we can make for God a home. How do we do that? Through our meditations. And the clarity that we reach in our own minds and hearts of God's unity in every time and in every place. So as an extension of the third level, the third kind of love, which is the realization that we can make for God a home within myself. I, at all times, at any time, and at any place, can be a home for God. The fourth kind of love is the realization that nothing that happens to me is by chance. Everywhere that I go is purposeful. A chassid, a student of Tanya, is never depressed. I missed a flight? No. It must be that God wants me to make a home for him right here in this airport. I got fired from my job? Okay. It means that God didn't want me to serve him in that place anymore. There's got to be some other place for me to serve God. It's the realization that wherever I am always in God's embrace, and that God looks to me for completion. The realization that God has made himself vulnerable, that God Almighty, the most powerful, most perfect entity, turns to me for validation, for completion. That is incredibly empowering and creates a profound sense of direction, of meaning, of purpose, and of love as we realize that I am needed. Suicide is most often a result of depression. And depression is most often a result of feeling valueless. The antithesis of depression is knowing that you're needed, knowing that you're important, knowing that you are a critical and vital cog in the wheel. Without you, all of the universe couldn't exist and couldn't properly continue. And that is the fourth kind of love, which we just came across in chapter 33. Which leads us to the fifth and final kind of love, which we came across just last week in chapter 34. And that was the realization that our patriarchs and matriarchs, Moses and Abraham, Isaac and Jacob, they all were perfect conduits for God. They were the paradigms of how to serve God, but we couldn't possibly reach that level, at least not on a consistent level. And then we were able to experience that kind of devotion and connection to God only momentarily on Mount Sinai, in that shock and awe revelation which God gave us, which literally caused our souls to expire. But the realization that even after the revelation at Sinai, God has given us the ability to connect with Him in the temple, and when it was subsequently destroyed, we are able to connect to God, to create a home for God each and every single time that we study Torah. That we can build an actual residence for God, for God's essence in this world. See, in chapter 33, we were talking about us connecting with God. But in chapter 34, we're talking about God connecting. That wherever we go, wherever we study Torah, we are sanctifying that place and bringing the will of God. Remember, the will of God and God Himself are one and the same. This is the basic principle of Zohar, of the Kabbalah, that God and His will are one. And therefore, when we study Torah, we're actually connecting to God's essence and bringing that essence to every place that we reach. You know, the Rebbe Rashab, the fifth Chabad Rebbe, once encountered two Hasidim who were sitting alongside on the side of the road. They were traveling back from the town of Lubavitch, where they had studied Hasidus from the Rebbe himself. This is the headquarters of Chabad. It was before Crown Heights. It was in Lubavitch, the town in White Russia. So these two Hasidim, the school teachers of Beshenkovitz, were walking back home, and it must have been a week or two trip back home. And along the way, they stopped on the side of the road, and they were sitting on the side of the road. Both of them with their eyes closed. One of them was reciting the teachings of the Rebbe from memory, and the other one was listening intently. And they didn't even notice when the wagon stopped beside them. The Rebbe himself was in the wagon watching these two Hasidim. At which point, the Rebbe pointed out to his son, the future Rebbe, the Friedrich Rebbe, the next Rebbe. He pointed out to him and he said, you know, this piece of real estate has been waiting for 5,672 years or so. An X amount of months and days and hours and minutes. This piece of real estate has been waiting for thousands of years for the two school teachers of Beshenkovitz to study Torah on this very spot. So that when they do study the Torah on this very spot, they'll be revealing the will of God, which is the essence of God. God has infused His essence into His writings. That is the first word of the Ten Commandments, the acronym of the first word of the Ten Commandments. I've infused my essence into my writings. When we study the word of God, we're studying the essence of God. We're drawing down the essence of God into every piece of real estate. And that fills us with a profound sense of joy as we realize that everywhere I go is purposeful, as I can bring the will of God, the essence of God, to everywhere that I go. So whereas the fourth love was the realization that everywhere I go is purposeful, the fifth love is the realization that it's God's essence that I'm connecting with everywhere. It's through God's Torah. I'm connecting to God's essence. And that, all the above, the five loves, empower us to realize that there is no such thing as mistakes. Everything happens for a reason. Wherever we go is by divine providence. And there's no such thing as killing time. To the enlightened individual, there's no such thing as killing time. Time is precious. Everywhere I need to be connecting to the essence of my organic essence, to God, through the power of Torah. Everywhere and every time needs to be sanctified and infused with purpose, with God's essence. Thus realizing that every breath that I breathe, every step that I take, every step that I tread is purposeful, is meaningful, is important. You know, somebody once said to me, he was already almost 80, And he said to me, Rabbi, why should I study Torah? What am I going to use it for? All the wisdom that this very educated person had studied in his life was wisdom that he was using. He'd study history and geography and political science and who knows what else he was studying. But he says, what am I studying Torah for? When am I going to use it? And I tried to explain to him that we don't study Torah because we're going to use it. It's not about the destination, it's about the journey. Each and every time we study Torah, you are connecting to God's essence here and now. You're fulfilling the purpose for which you were placed in this earth, to draw God's essence into a place that God's essence has never been revealed, because God needs you to invite him in to your life. And that's how we conclude chapter 34, with the realization that we have so much reason to love God. We have so much purpose in our lives, yet that is not in conflict with the realization of our imperfections, the realization of our sins, which allows us to feel two conflicting emotions. On the one hand, we feel profound joy from the love that we have for our ability to connect with God and to fulfill our purpose in one of these 5 ways, or all of these 5 ways. But at the same time, we're able to harbor tremendous bitterness within our heart for our failures, our imperfections, and our dysfunction. And they're not in conflict. See, if you only had one heart, it would be impossible to have both bitterness and joy at the same time. But because we have not one but 2 hearts, you can have both of those emotions at the same time. The natural soul feels bitterness over its imperfections. The godly soul feels joy over its ability to connect with the divine. Let's see this in the words of the Tanya, page 385. Middle of the 385, a long section of the Tanya dealing with emotional maintenance, which began in chapter 26, now draws to a close. In chapters 26, 27, and 28, we learned various methods to deal with depression, arising from both material and spiritual concerns. In chapters 29 and 30, we learned a number of meditations to humble the spirit, so as to overcome emotional insensitivity to spirituality. And in chapters 31, chapters 33, and 34, we've learned a number of meditations to lead us to joy. The Tanya concludes by stressing that the negative and positive emotions we have explored are not mutually exclusive, and it is possible to integrate both into your heart at the very same time. Now, with all the above detailed meditations that bring joy to the soul, there is nothing to stop you from being disgusting in your eyes and repulsive, to quote Psalms 15. Broken-hearted and ego-deflated at the very same time as you are joyous. Why would you want to be disgusting and obnoxious, repulsive and ego-deflated, broken-hearted? This is what we've learned in chapter 29 and 30. Just to remind you, we learned the doctrine of the chopped wood. Remember the doctrine of the chopped wood. We learned that a huge log of wood will not catch a light. It's only when it's splintered into small pieces, when you chop your wood, that's when your log will catch a light. If you're experiencing apathy and indifference to spirituality, we said that's because you're too full of yourself. You need to break your ego, chop your wood, in order to be able to allow the light of the soul to shine within you, to be able to feel in your heart what you understand in your brain, to jump from Bina comprehension to Das realization. So it is critical, vital to experience brokenheartedness and ego deflation within yourself, which is what King David calls in the book of Psalms 15, verse 4, being disgusting and repulsive in your own eyes. I know it's not very popular in today's current thinking to think of yourself as broken or disgusting. But when you break your ego, that is vital to allow your soul to catch a light, to be able to experience, to feel godliness, to feel inspiration. You've got to be able to experience the doctrine of the chopped wood. Why is it possible to coexist the ego deflation, the brokenheartedness, together with joy in your heart at the same time? Because being disgusting in your eyes is a reflection of your body and animal soul, and being joyful is a reflection of your divine soul and the spark of godliness enmeshed in it and energizing it, as mentioned in chapter 31. Since you have not one but 2 souls, it is possible for you to have 2 different feelings simultaneously. The Tanya now cites a precedent from the Zohar, the book of Kabbalah, for this approach. And it was in reference to such a case of experiencing opposite emotions simultaneously that the Zohar states that when Rabbi Shimon revealed wondrous secrets that explained the destruction of the temple, the theme of this week, we're commemorating Tisha B'Av, the destruction of our temple just tomorrow night. Prepare yourself, please, for the 25-hour fast tomorrow night, starting at sundown all the way through to Thursday night. Very, very important to fast on Tisha B'Av, the 25 hours. It was in reference to this that when Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai taught a teaching to his son about the mystical secrets of the destruction of the temple, that his son, Rabbi Elazar, who's buried right next to him, he said that he felt tears lodged into my heart on one side and joy lodged into my heart on the other side. Tears lodged in my heart on one side because of the heightened awareness of the temple's destruction, but joy lodged in my heart on the other side as a result of the wondrous revelation of new, profound Torah insights. This is how we are able to realize two conflicting emotions within our hearts at the same time. Tears in my half of my heart and joy in the other half of my heart. There's not really half, it's two hearts. The animal soul, natural soul experiences sadness, or it's not sadness, bitterness, brokenheartedness over our ego. And the godly soul experiences joy in its ability to soar and connect with infinity, with God. So this, my friends, is how we conclude this next section of Tanya. We've come a long way, and I highly encourage you to review these classes. These are profound ideas of divine wisdom that are not always understood in just the first sitting. I encourage you to review them. Somebody called me the other day from Toronto to tell me that he's on his third review of some of these classes, and he's loving it. So this is really beautiful to be able to have these classes recorded so that you can review them. I do the same with my classes that I study. I'm able to review and replay and rewind to be able to make sure that I properly understand them. So I hope that you'll be able to do the same. And to really become comfortable with Tanya, because at this point, we've come so far. We've learned 34 chapters of Tanya so far, in the sense that we're comfortable with the idea, the doctrine of two souls. We know we have not one but two souls. We're comfortable with the conflict, with the schizophrenia that we have within ourselves, and we're learning to master it. We're learning to use it to our advantage, to be able to use the natural soul's ego against it, to break the ego for the doctrine of chopped wood, to be able to experience the light kindling within us by breaking our ego in our natural soul, and at the same time to experience tremendous joy through the 5 kinds of joy that we've just learned today, through our godly soul's ability to come home. So thank you very much, everybody. We'd love to hear your thoughts and feedback. Please feel free to send me an email to rabbi@jewishgardens.com. That's rabbi@jewishgardens.com. Thank you to Keith Kleinig for being today's Torah sponsor, Torah study sponsor. Once again, we really appreciate your support. Anybody can sponsor daily Torah study online at jewishgardens.com/donate, or by calling the office at 561-624-2223. A quick reminder that tomorrow is Wednesday, and tomorrow morning we'll be studying the Medrash on Eicha, on Lamentations, which is the theme of Tisha B'Av. So tomorrow morning, as well as Thursday morning, we'll be studying a special study, the Medrash on the Book of Lamentations by Jeremiah. Most Torah study you're not allowed to study on Tisha B'Av. It's such a sad day that you're not allowed to even study Torah, but you are allowed to study parts of Torah that deal with the destruction of our temple, and that includes the Medrash on Lamentations. We'll be studying that tomorrow morning and Thursday morning at 8:30. Also on Thursday at noon, we'll be having a very special Tisha B'Av presentation on Zoom only. That's jewishgardens.com/Zoom. It's called Finding Faith and Hope in Troubled Times. How appropriate for today. It's about how the Rebbe not only survived, but actually thrived through Nazi Germany. He was actually in France and Portugal, and what the journey of the Rebbe to safety to America as he traveled on the last boat to America, what he was actually doing at that time gives us tremendous courage and fortitude to realize that we can do the same. So that's happening on Thursday at noon on Tisha B'Av on Zoom only. That's jewishgardens.com/Zoom. I hope that you like this video. Please share this video. Please follow us on YouTube at youtube.com/Jewish Gardens by clicking the red subscribe link. Same thing on Facebook. If you could follow us on Facebook and be notified of all the Torah classes, please share this video to spread the light of Torah to every place and every dark corner, even of the World Wide Web. Thank you very much, everybody. Have a wonderful day. It was a pleasure studying with you. Shalom.